For 32 years, her life was gray cubicles and numbers. At 55, she made a change that led to Balinese sunsets, global adventures, and a love she never dared to imagine.
My name is Evelyn, and for 32 years, my life was painted in shades of beige. Beige cubicle walls, beige computer monitors, beige folders filled with numbers that marched in orderly, predictable lines. I was an accountant. A good one. Meticulous, reliable, utterly invisible. I was 55 years old, and the highlight of my week was correctly balancing a difficult spreadsheet. It was a quiet life, a safe life, a life my parents had meticulously planned for me, and which I, a dutiful daughter, had followed without question. It was also a slow, soul-crushing death by 1,000 paper cuts. You probably think you know this story. A middle-aged woman has a crisis, buys a sports car, has a regrettable affair. Honey, that's just a ripple. What I did was a tsunami. I'm telling you this from a place that smells of frangipani and sea salt, a place where the sun kisses your skin with a warmth I'd only ever read about in travel magazines. I'm telling you this because the people who knew me back then, the ones who called me predictable Evelyn, the ones who laughed openly and scornfully when I told them my plan, they have no idea what happened next. And if you knew the secret I discovered about myself, the one that truly set me free after I'd already made the leap, you'd understand that my story isn't just about changing my life. It's about reclaiming a soul I didn't even know had been stolen. The catalyst wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow, creeping realization, a quiet hum of discontent that grew louder each year. It started after my parents passed away, leaving me truly alone for the first time in my life. With them gone, their expectations no longer a constant, gentle pressure on my shoulders, I began to see the beige walls of my life for what they were, a prison I had voluntarily inhabited. I'd sit at my desk under the fluorescent hum of the office lights, and my mind would drift. I'd remember being a girl who loved to move, to dance, to climb trees, a girl who felt most alive when she was in motion. Where had that girl gone? I'd buried her under decades of spreadsheets and tax returns, convinced myself that practicality was a virtue and dreams were a frivolous luxury. The final straw came during my 55th birthday party, if you could call it that. My colleagues from the accounting firm Henderson and Lowe threw me a small, sad gathering in the break room, a sheet cake with Happy 55th Evelyn written in wobbly blue icing, a bouquet of carnations, a gift card to a sensible department store. They all stood around, smiling their polite, distant smiles, talking about their weekend plans, their children's college applications. And as I looked at their faces, I saw my own future reflected back at me. Another 10 years of this, then a gold watch, a sadder, smaller cake, and a slow fade into a quiet, beige retirement. A wave of panic, so cold and so absolute, it was like being plunged into icy water, washed over me. I couldn't breathe. Was this it? Was this all my one precious life was ever going to be? That night, I went home, not to my sensible condo, but to the internet. I didn't search for retirement plans. I searched for the opposite. I typed in words I hadn't dared to think in years. Adventure, change, passion, new life. And somehow, through a series of clicks that felt guided by a force outside myself, I landed on a video. It was about a yoga retreat in Bali, Indonesia. I watched mesmerized. Women, some younger, some older than me, moving with a grace and strength I hadn't felt in my own body in decades. The lush green rice paddies, the turquoise water, the serene, focused expressions on their faces. It was a world away from my beige existence. It was alive. And something inside me, that long-buried girl who loved to move, woke up and screamed, "Yes, that." The decision, when it finally solidified, felt both insane and completely and utterly right. I was going to quit my job, sell my condo, and use my life savings not for a sensible retirement annuity, but to go to Bali and become a yoga instructor. When I announced it, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. My boss, Mr. Henderson Jr., stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. My colleagues exchanged pitying glances, whispering about menopause and a breakdown. The laughter, though, was the worst. It wasn't loud, roaring laughter. It was worse. It was the quiet, condescending chuckles, the little smirks that said, "Oh, poor, deluded Evelyn, yoga, Bali, at her age?" They saw a 55-year-old accountant who'd finally lost her mind, a woman reaching for a ridiculous, impossible dream. Their ridicule, their disbelief, should have crushed me. Instead, it was like gasoline on the fire that had just been lit in my soul. I smiled my polite accountant smile, thanked them for their concern, and went home to book my one-way ticket. The first few months were terrifying. I was in a foreign country, surrounded by people half my age, my body stiff and uncooperative from 32 years spent hunched over a desk. Every muscle ached. Every downward-facing dog felt like an impossible feat of engineering. The laughter of my old colleagues echoed in my head. I was a fool. I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But then slowly, something started to shift. I started to breathe, really breathe. For the first time in my life, it felt like. I started to feel muscles I didn't know I had. I started to listen to my body, to honor its limits, to celebrate its small victories. And the quiet voice of my own intuition, the one I had ignored for so long, began to grow stronger than the echoes of their doubt. I wasn't just learning yoga. I was learning to live. I was learning to be present in my own skin, in my own life. The beige was flaking away, revealing colors I didn't know I possessed.
Evelyn has taken the boldest step of her life, but the laughter of her former colleagues echoes in her ears. Can a 55-year-old woman whose body is not used to exertion really become a yoga instructor on the other side of the world? Or will disappointment await her, confirming that she was just crazy?
The first 6 months in Bali were a crucible. Every morning, my alarm would go off before dawn, and every muscle in my 55-year-old body would scream in protest. There were days I'd look in the mirror at my aching, exhausted self and hear the condescending chuckles of my old colleagues from Henderson and Lowe. Yoga instructor? At her age? Poor, deluded Evelyn. Their phantom voices became the demons I had to conquer every time I stepped onto my mat. But with each painful stretch, each hard-won moment of balance, I wasn't just strengthening my core. I was forging a spine of steel. I was the oldest student in my teacher training program by at least 2 decades. My classmates were all luminous and possibly flexible young things who could twist themselves into pretzels without breaking a sweat. They were kind, mostly, in a slightly patronizing way, calling me inspirational when I finally managed to touch my toes. I didn't want their inspiration. I wanted their respect. And I realized the only way to get it was to find my own unique strength. I couldn't compete with their youthful elasticity, But I had something they didn't. 55 years of life, of quiet desperation, of understanding what it truly meant to feel trapped in your own body, in your own life. My yoga practice became my confession, my therapy. When the instructor spoke of letting go, I wasn't just letting go of tension in my shoulders. I was letting go of decades of my parents' expectations, of the beige ghost of my former self. When we moved into heart-opening poses, I felt the literal cracking of the armor I'd built around my own passions. The pain was real, physical, but the release was euphoric. And I started to get good. My movements became more fluid, my understanding of the philosophy behind the poses deeper. My final teaching demonstration wasn't about perfect form. It was about telling a story of resilience through movement, and it moved my young instructor to tears. I had found my voice. After graduation, I didn't try to compete with the trendy studios catering to live 20-somethings. Instead, with the last of my savings, I rented a small, beautiful open-air pavilion overlooking a quiet rice paddy and started offering classes specifically for beginners of a certain age and those looking for yoga for a weary soul. My first class had 3 students, the next 5. Within a few months, word had spread through the expatriate and traveler communities. My classes were full. They didn't come for a grueling workout. They came for my story, for the understanding in my eyes. They came because when I told them to breathe through discomfort, I wasn't just talking about a tight hamstring. I was talking about life. I wasn't just a yoga instructor. I was a facilitator of second chances. My uninteresting life as an accountant had given me an unexpected gift, a deep, first-hand knowledge of what it felt like to be stuck. And that, it turned out, was a far more valuable teaching tool than a perfect handstand. That's how I met Kadek. He wasn't one of my students. He was the owner of the small, fragrant coffee plantation next to my pavilion. He was 32, with a smile as warm and bright as the Bali sun and eyes that held the ancient, calm wisdom of his culture. He was a widower, his young wife having passed from a sudden illness a few years prior, leaving him to raise his little daughter Maya. He would often watch my classes from a distance, a small, curious smile on his face. Sometimes after my last class, he'd bring me a cup of the most exquisite coffee I'd ever tasted. We started talking, first about yoga, then about the land, his coffee beans, his love for his daughter, his own quiet grief. I was wary at first. The age difference felt like a chasm. What could a vibrant young man like him possibly see in a 55-year-old American woman who was just now learning how to live? But Kadek didn't see my age. He saw me, the real me, the one that was finally emerging. He wasn't charmed by a practice persona or interested in my finances. He had his own successful business. He was drawn to my story, my newfound passion, my resilience. "You have a strong light, Evelyn," he told me one evening as we sat watching the fireflies dance over the rice paddies. "Many people, when they get hurt, their light goes out. Yours is just now learning how to shine its brightest." His attention was gentle, respectful, utterly devoid of the manipulation or pity I might have expected. It was the simple, honest admiration of one soul for another. And it was terrifying and exhilarating. He wasn't a young lover in the scandalous way my old colleagues might have imagined with their sneering laughs. He was a kind, beautiful man, a kindred spirit I had met on the other side of the world in a life I had never dared to dream of. One evening, after a particularly beautiful sunset, he walked me back to my small bungalow. At my door, he gently took my hand. "Evelyn," he said, his voice soft, May I kiss you?" He asked. After all the years of dutifully doing what was expected, of having my life planned for me, this simple question, this offering of choice and respect was the most profoundly romantic thing I had ever experienced. I looked into his warm, kind eyes, And for the first time in my life, I felt not like sensible Evelyn, the accountant, not like a grieving daughter, not like a crazy old woman, but simply like a desirable, vibrant woman. Yes, Kadik, I whispered. Yes, you may. And as he kissed me, a kiss that was as sweet and gentle and full of promise as the fragrant Bali air, I knew that my transformation was complete. I hadn't just changed my life, I had finally, truly begun to live it.
Evelyn has found success, love, and a new self in Bali. But can this idyllic life last? And what will happen when her past, in the form of those who laughed at her, unexpectedly reminds her of its existence? Her journey is just beginning.
The months that followed that first kiss with Kadek felt like living in a dream I was terrified of waking from. The beige world of Henderson and Lowe, with its spreadsheets and passive-aggressive colleagues, faded into a distant, monochromatic memory. My new reality was a kaleidoscope of vibrant color and sensation. The impossible green of the rice paddies outside my pavilion, the intoxicating scent of frangipani blossoms after a warm rain, the rich, dark aroma of Kadek's coffee brewing in the morning, and the bright, musical laughter of his daughter, 7-year-old Maya. Our relationship unfolded with a natural, unhurried grace that was entirely new to me. There were no games, no hidden agendas. With Kadek, everything was simple, honest. He was a man deeply rooted in his land, his culture, his family. He ran his small, organic coffee plantation with a quiet pride, his days marked by the rhythms of the earth. And he invited me into that world, not as an accessory or a novelty, but as a partner. I'd help him and his family sort beans on their wide, cool porch, listening to their gentle chatter in Balinese, a language I was slowly beginning to learn. In turn, he'd often sit quietly at the back of my yoga classes, a serene presence, his eyes full of a warm, steady admiration that made me feel more beautiful and powerful at 56 than I ever had at 26. Maya, his little girl, was shy at first, a solemn child with her father's kind eyes, but slowly she warmed to me. I think she was drawn to the quiet calm I tried to cultivate. I never tried to be her mother. She had a mother whose memory they both cherished deeply. I simply offered to be her friend. I teach her little breathing exercises when she felt upset, or we practiced tree pose together, giggling as we wobbled and fell in the soft grass. One afternoon, she shyly presented me with a drawing of 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun: a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun, her limbs stretched into what was unmistakably a yoga pose. "That's us," she whispered. "Our Bali family." My heart felt so full in that moment I thought it might burst. It was Kadek who first planted the seed of a world beyond our island paradise. His coffee was gaining international recognition, and he'd been invited to a specialty coffee convention in Trieste, Italy. "He has to go for a week," he told me one evening, his expression troubled, "to meet some buyers, but I hate the thought of leaving you and Maya." "We'll be fine, my love," I assured him. He looked at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've never been to Europe, have you, Evelyn?" I shook my head. The furthest I'd ever been from home before this was a weekend trip to Myrtle Beach in 1988. He took my hand and said, "Come with me." His voice was quiet but firm. "Let me show you. Let me show you Italy, and then maybe we can see more. Paris? Greece? You spent 30 years staring at spreadsheets. It's time you saw the world you were balancing the books for." The idea was terrifying and thrilling. The old Evelyn, the sensible accountant, would have immediately listed 100 reasons why it was impractical, expensive, irresponsible. But the new Evelyn, the one who had learned to breathe through discomfort and open her heart, just looked into his loving eyes and said, "When do we leave?" We left Maya in the loving care of her grandmother, and 2 weeks later, I found myself stepping off a plane in Venice, a city I'd only ever seen in movies. It was everything and nothing like I'd imagined. The grandeur of St. Mark's Square, the impossible beauty of the canals, the sheer overwhelming weight of centuries of history. It was intoxicating. For the first few days, I was almost silent, just trying to absorb it all. Kadek was the perfect guide, patient, intuitive, letting me discover things at my own pace. He'd hold my hand as we navigated the labyrinthine streets, buy me gelato, laugh with delight at my awestruck expression as we glided through the canals in a gondola. After his convention in Trieste, Italy, a bustling port city with its own unique Austro-Hungarian charm, we took a train to Florence. There, surrounded by the masterpieces of the Renaissance, something profound shifted in me. Standing before Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, I saw not just a painting, but a story of emergence, of beauty and grace being born from the sea. I felt a kinship with her, as if I too had been floating in a formless ocean for most of my life, only to be brought to shore by a new, unexpected wind. We traveled for a month. We saw the rolling hills of Tuscany, tasted wine that felt like sunshine in a glass, walked through ancient Roman ruins. Every day was a revelation, a chipping away at the beige walls I had lived within for so long. And every day my love for Kadek deepened. He loved seeing the world through my fresh, amazed eyes. He wasn't just my lover. He was my guide, my partner in this grand second-act adventure. But it was during our last week in a small, sun-drenched village in the Amalfi Coast that something happened that brought the ghost of my past life rushing back with an unexpected, jarring force. We were sitting at a small seaside cafe, enjoying a simple lunch of fresh pasta and local wine, the blue of the Mediterranean stretching out before us. It was idyllic, perfect. Then I heard a voice from a nearby table, a distinctly American voice, loud and full of a brittle, self-important cheerfulness I hadn't heard in over a year. I mean, can you believe the exchange rate? It's practically a steal. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice. Slowly, my heart pounding, I turned my head. There at a table, not 10 feet away, sat two women. One I didn't recognize. The other was Susan, one of my former senior colleagues from Henderson and Lowe, the one who had always looked at me with a mixture of pity and condescension, the one whose laughter had been the loudest when I'd announced my insane plan to become a yoga instructor in Bali. For a dizzying moment, I felt the urge to hide, to shrink back into the shadows of the cafe umbrella, to become the invisible beige Evelyn of Henderson and Lowe once more. The sound of Susan's brittle laughter was a physical thing, a phantom pain that shot through me, threatening to undo all the peace and confidence I had so painstakingly built over the past year. She was here, a ghost from my past, sitting in judgment in my newfound paradise. Kadek, sensing the sudden tension in me, placed his warm hand over mine. "Evelyn, my love, what is it? You look as if you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have," I whispered, my eyes still fixed on Susan's table. Just then, Susan turned her head, her gaze sweeping across the cafe, and her eyes, magnified by her expensive designer sunglasses, landed on me. For a moment, there was no recognition, just a blank, dismissive glance at another sun-weathered tourist. Then, her eyes widened slightly, her jaw went slack, and the sunglasses slid down her nose. "Evelyn? Evelyn Periwinkle? Is that really you?" Her voice cut through the gentle lapping of the waves and the murmur of Italian conversation. There was no escape. Taking a deep breath, I gave Kadek's hand a reassuring squeeze and pasted on a serene smile. A real one this time, not the polite, empty one I used to wear at the office. "Hello, Susan," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Small world, isn't it?" She rose from her table, her friend looking on with undisguised curiosity, and approached ours. She was dressed in what I assumed was the latest resort wear, a flurry of beige and white linen that probably cost more than my first car. Her eyes raked over me, taking in my simple sundress, my bare feet in sandals, my skin tanned from the Bali sun, my gray hair now streaked with more silver, but pulled back in a simple, elegant bun. Then her gaze fell on Kadik, on his youthful, handsome face, his arm resting protectively on the back of my chair, and her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up towards her hairline. "Well, I'll be," she said, her voice a mixture of astonishment and undisguised, condescending disbelief. "Evelyn, you're certainly a long way from Macon." "Yes, I am," I replied, my smile never wavering. "In every way that matters. Susan, this is my partner Kadek. Kadek, this is Susan, a former colleague." Kadek stood politely, offering a small, graceful bow of his head. "A pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice warm and steady. Susan just stared at him for a moment, then back at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to compute this impossible scene. "Your partner?" she finally managed, the word dripping with insinuation. "Well, good for you, Evelyn. I guess your little yoga adventure is working out for you." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The old Evelyn would have withered under that tone, would have mumbled an apology, felt a flush of shame. But the new Evelyn, the one who had found her strength on a yoga mat overlooking a rice paddy, simply let out a small, genuine laugh. "It's more than an adventure, Susan," I said gently. "It's my life. And yes, it's working out beautifully." I looked at Kadek, my eyes full of love and contentment I knew she couldn't possibly understand. "I teach yoga. I run a small, successful retreat space. I have a wonderful family with Kadek and his daughter, and we're currently spending a month exploring Italy because Kadek's coffee business brought him here for a convention." I laid it all out, not as a boast, but as a simple statement of fact, each word a quiet testament to the life I had built from the ashes of the one she and the others had scorned. I watched her face as the information sank in. I saw the initial disbelief, followed by a flicker of something that looked remarkably like envy, then quickly masked by her usual cynical superiority. "Coffee business? How quaint," she said, though her smile was strained now. The twist, the unexpected denouement I never could have planned, came from her. Maybe it was the shock, or the wine she'd been drinking, or a sudden crack in her own carefully maintained facade. "Well, you certainly got out at the right time," she said with a sudden bitter sigh, sinking into one of our empty chairs without being invited. "It's a madhouse back at the firm. Ever since old man Henderson retired and his son took over completely, it's all downsizing and synergies. My department is next on the chopping block. 30 years I've given them, and I'll be lucky to walk away with a decent severance." She shook her head, a genuine look of weary frustration on her face. "You're the lucky one, Evelyn, escaping the rat race." I just looked at her. Susan, always so polished, so secure, so quick to judge my foolish dreams. And here she was, her own beige world crumbling, her own future uncertain, looking at me with envy. Me, the woman she dismissed as a deluded old fool. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost overwhelming. There was no triumph in her misery, only a profound, quiet sense of validation. I hadn't run away from a rat race. I had run towards a life,
My life, and it had been the wisest decision I'd ever made. "I'm sorry to hear that, Susan," I said, and I meant it. Her bitterness felt a world away from my own newfound peace. "I hope things work out for you." She just waved a dismissive hand, then looked at Kadik again, then at me, her eyes filled with a new, grudging kind of respect. "So, a yoga instructor in Bali, who would have thought?" "I did," I said softly. "It just took me 55 years to listen to myself." She had no answer to that. She mumbled a hasty goodbye and retreated to her own table, her conversation with her friend now noticeably more subdued. Kadik's hand found mine again across the table. "Are you all right, my love?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. I looked at him, at his kind, loving face. I looked out at the impossibly blue Mediterranean Sea. I felt the warm sun on my skin, and I felt free. Utterly, completely free. The last ghost of my past, the phantom voice of doubt and ridicule, had just been laid to rest, not by any clever retort from me, by the simple and undeniable reality of my own happiness. "I'm more than all right, Kadik," I said, my voice full of a joy so pure it almost felt like a prayer. "I'm perfect."
Evelyn has not only found a new life, but has also achieved a moral victory over her past. But what awaits her ahead? Can she maintain this fragile happiness? And what new horizons will her journey around the world open up for her? The final chapter will tell of her ultimate self-determination.
Leaving Italy, I felt as if I was shedding the last dusty layer of my old life. The encounter with Susan, which I'd initially dreaded, had turned out to be an unexpected gift. It wasn't about gloating over her misfortune. It was about seeing with my own eyes that the beige prison I'd escaped was still very much a prison, and that I, poor deluded Evelyn, was the one who was truly free. The last phantom voice of doubt in my head had been silenced for good. Our travels didn't end there. That month in Europe had ignited a wanderlust in me I never knew I possessed. Kadik, seeing the joy and wonder in my eyes, was more than happy to indulge it. His coffee business was thriving, manageable from a distance with the help of his trusted family back in Bali, and my yoga classes had inspired a few of my senior students to start their own teaching journeys, leaving my little pavilion in capable hands. For the first time, I had no spreadsheets to balance, no parental expectations to fulfill, no reason to be anywhere but exactly where I wanted to be. The world had opened up to me. We spent the next 2 years as gentle nomads. We weren't frantic tourists rushing from one landmark to another. We lived. We spent 3 months in a small village in the south of France, where I learned to bake bread from a woman whose hands were as gnarled and beautiful as ancient olive trees. I taught yoga in the village square, my students a mix of curious locals and sun-weathered expatriates, our shared language the language of breath and movement. Kadik, with his easy charm, learned about their ancient vineyards, trading stories of coffee beans for tales of grape harvests. We went to Japan during cherry blossom season, the fleeting, breathtaking beauty of the sakura, a poignant reminder of the importance of embracing life in its every transient moment. I found a deep connection between the mindful meditation of a Japanese tea ceremony and the principles of my own yoga practice. There, in a quiet Kyoto temple, I led a workshop on yoga for a peaceful mind. My story of quiet desperation and radical change resonating deeply with the stressed-out executives and seeking souls who attended. My teaching evolved. It was no longer just about the poses, it was about sharing my journey.
I spoke openly about my 32 years in a beige cubicle, about the fear of change, about the ridicule I'd faced. I spoke about what it means to reclaim your life at an age when society often expects you to quietly fade away. My age, my graying hair, my less than perfect flexibility, these were no longer liabilities. They were my greatest assets. They made me real. They made me relatable. I started a small blog, The Beige Escapee, sharing my thoughts and my travel stories, and to my astonishment, it found an audience. Other women my age and even younger wrote to me, telling me my story had inspired them to take up painting, to learn a new language, to finally leave a job or a relationship that was suffocating them. I had become, in my own small way, a beacon of possibility. In Kodiak, our love was the quiet, steady rhythm beneath it all. It was a partnership of equals. He was my lover, yes, but also my friend, my travel companion, my biggest cheerleader. There were no power dynamics, no games. We were two souls, one young but old in spirit, one old but young in heart, who had found each other. He celebrated my strength, cherished my wisdom, and found endless joy in my rediscovery of the world. Watching him with his daughter Maya, whenever we returned to Bali, seeing his patient, profound love for her, only deepened my own love for him. He was a good man, a kind man, a man who had healed his own grief and now helped me heal the long dormant wounds of a life half lived. My younger lover, a title that would have made my old colleagues sneer, was the most mature, centered, and loving partner I had ever known. Our age difference was a fact, but it was an irrelevant one, a mere number that had no bearing on the depth of our connection. Our final big trip before we decided to settle back into the gentle rhythm of our Bali life for a while was to the vast, open landscapes of New Mexico, the very place Frank had bought me that colorful runner so many years ago. Standing at the edge of the Rio Grande Gorge, the wind whipping my hair, the immense ancient landscape stretching out before me, I felt a profound sense of coming full circle. The Evelyn who had gone on that trip with Frank all those years ago had been a different person, a dutiful wife, a sensible woman content in her small defined world. The woman standing here now, hand in hand with Kodiak, was someone else entirely. She was a world traveler, a successful teacher, a beloved partner, a writer. She was me, the real me. That evening, we sat outside our small adobe rental, watching the desert sky bleed into a riot of orange, pink, and purple. "Are you happy, my Evelyn?" Kodiak asked softly, his arm around my shoulders. I looked at the vast, peaceful landscape, felt the warmth of his body next to mine, and thought of the long, strange, wonderful journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of quiet desperation, the sudden panic in that office break room, the fear, the ridicule, the leap of faith, the aches and pains of my first yoga classes, the unexpected joy, the discovery of love I never thought I'd feel again. Finding yourself, I realized, isn't about arriving at a final destination. It's about having the courage to start the journey, to shed the skins that no longer fit, to embrace the unknown, to keep breathing, keep moving, keep opening your heart. "Happy?" I said, a slow, contented smile spreading across my face. "No, my love, it's more than that." I leaned my head on his shoulder, my heart full and calm. "I'm free."